Hello there friends! We got a really good response to some of our dyeing experiments over on Instagram, so I thought it was time to bring some more dyeing content to YouTube. Today's experiment is a little bit of fun because it's being done in conjunction with my friend Louise from NVG Dublin. This particular experiment involves using gorse flowers. For those of you who don't know about gorse flowers, here's a little bit about them. Gorse is native to Europe and the United Kingdom, but was introduced to Australia as a hedge plant in the early 1800s, which then got out of control. Gorse is an invasive weed that disrupts the growing of native plants in bushland. It invades agricultural land and generally can't be eaten by cattle and sheep. So we don't really have to feel any guilt about harvesting this plant for use as dyes. Louise found some gorse flowers growing not far from her own home, which meant it was safe for her to go and collect some during our isolation lockdown. We managed to organise a contact-free exchange of goodies, which meant I ended up with exactly the same flowers as Louise used for her own dye experiment. And so what we get to do is verify our outcomes to see what colours I get as well. So here's a quick rundown on the materials I'm using today. I have 220 grams of gorse flower buds, 100 grams of pure wool yarn, 15 grams of alum, and a big old pot of water. So what I need to do first is I need to steep the flowers in the big old pot of water and let all the colour be extracted. This is a very simple method of extraction, but also one of the most common, so that's what we're going with today. The pot I am using is a stainless steel pot. Of all the pots that I have, stainless steel is the one that least influences the colour outcome, and so it's going to be the one that I start my gorse flower experiments with. It's also the same kind of pot that Louise used, and therefore we'll hopefully end up with very similar results. So let's get this pot on to steep. Now these flowers are not quite as fresh as would have been used for Louise's experiment because there was a couple of days delay between when she picked them, when she used what she needed, and when I ended up with these in my hot little hands. But as you can see, they've maintained a lot of colour even though there's been a couple of days delay, which means hopefully this experiment will be just as successful as Louise's. Now while the water in this pot is already pretty warm, not boiling hot, but still pretty warm, I am actually going to put it over a low heat to keep the temperature relatively warm, and hopefully it will expedite this extraction process. Alright, so what I have done is while we are waiting for our blossoms to steep and that extraction process to happen, I have just gone and mordanted my yarn. Remember, 15 grams of mordant per 100 grams of yarn for the wool particularly. I've mixed all that in, my yarn is thoroughly soaked, so the mordant's going to be getting into all the different bits of fibre, which is excellent. We want to do that because that will help the dye bind to the material. That's what a mordant does. It helps that binding process to hopefully make that colour last as long as possible and be as light and wash fast as possible. Just want to quickly talk about why we're doing these quantities. I'm doing this to see how close to Louise's result I can get. Louise used 100 grams of roving. Now it's slightly different to yarn, but in principle, not really. It just means hers was spun after it was dyed and mine was spun before it was dyed. I'm using pure wool, same as her. Mine's an 8-ply commercially available yarn, basically from any good craft store you'd be able to get one. 100 grams, same as her. Louise used 12%, I use 15%, so it's a minor difference, but it should pretty much be the same. And we're using 200 grams of gorse flowers. Well, mine's technically 220, but I wasn't going to waste the 20 grams. So now we wait. The flowers are steeping, the yarn is soaking, we are just waiting for everything to click into place. Once that's ready, I'll come back to you and we'll strain out those blossoms. The gorse blossoms sat in the pot overnight. They were on the heat for a few hours yesterday, but they sat in the pot overnight. So the extraction's pretty much 100% complete. Now what I need to do is empty out all the gorse blossoms, but leave as much of the water in as possible. Alright, so there might still be a couple of pieces of Gorse Blossom in there, but I'm not too worried about it. It's not really going to affect it that much. So here is the yarn that I had soaking in the mordant overnight as well, so it's fully absorbed as much of that alum as possible. It's still really damp, so that should be good to go straight in now. Now the dye bath is this really rich sort of honey amber colour, but it's already got this beautiful buttery colour on the yarn. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to put it on the heat for a couple of hours and then we'll come back to it and we'll pull the yarn out and see what colour we ended up with. So the dye has had plenty of time to work now. I had it on a low heat on the stove for about 6 hours yesterday, and then I let the pot cool down with the yarn in it, and it's been sitting overnight, so it's about time that we get this yarn out of the pot now. Now, depending on what dyes you use at home for your own experiments, you may want to use a pair of tongs, but I know that this dye is perfectly safe for me to handle, so I'm just going to put my tongs to the side and get my hands a little bit wet. There we go. Alright, so this is a little bit wet at the moment, so the colour is probably a couple of shades darker than what it's going to be when it's dry, but you can already see how vibrant that yellow is. It's just beautiful. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to untangle the yarn because it's gotten a little bit looped while it's been in the pot. I'm going to hang it up and let it dry for a good few hours, and then I will come back and show you all the final result. Okay, so the dyeing is done, the yarn's been rinsed, washed and dried, and now we can find out the final colour that our yarn turned out. I'm pretty excited about this one. You ready for this one? Look at how vibrantly yellow that came out. So as you'll remember, I did this to try and recreate the results my friend Louise got. So my friend Louise sent me a sample of what she'd dyed. Let's compare the results. I put her sample onto a sample card like I do with all of mine, and as you can see, they are practically identical. So the tiny details, like the fact that I had 20 grams of extra blossom and I used a slightly higher percentage of alum, clearly didn't make that much of a difference on it. We still ended up with the same result, this beautiful, bright yellow. I love that we ended up with the same result, that there was very little variation between the two experiments. So we can safely say that Gorse Blossom has a consistent yellow dye using the methods I've outlined here. Now I'm going to put my own experiment onto a sample card so that we've got that for the records. And I'm not sure yet what I want to do with this yarn, but I have a feeling I'll come up with something. But that is not the only part of this experiment that I did. So when I pulled this hank of yarn out of the pot, I looked at the bath water and I thought to myself, there's something more in this. I think I can get more colour out of this. So naturally, I mordanted some more yarn and I stuck it back in the dye bath. So now let's look at the result of our exhaust bath. Another beautiful, bright hank of yellow vibrance. As you can see, there is a slight weakening of the colour there, but it's actually not that considerable. There's not a huge dramatic drop. It's slightly lighter, but still pretty awesome. When we talk about medieval colours and clothing in the different medieval cultures, regions and time periods, we have to think about the different shades of colour that would have been available as well. So yeah, you might have paid a higher price for a more vibrant colour, but getting a second or even third bath colour would still have been quite a lovely tone, and I think still would have been quite an enjoyable thing to wear. But you know what? I'm still not done. As much as, yes, I love wool yarn and I do lots of things with wool yarn, it's not the only fibre that would have been dyed in the medieval period. So naturally I had to try other yarn types as well. With this hank in the exhaust bath, I put some other yarn as well. So this was dyed at the same time as this second hank of wool. I put a hank of linen in. Now, linen is generally not going to hold its colour as well as wool, but the fact that it's picked up a very vibrant yellow in an exhaust bath, I think is still pretty nifty. Again, light fastness is probably not going to be great either. Wash fastness, yeah, I probably wouldn't expect this colour to last very long. But the fact that it took the way it did and it's been washed thoroughly now, so this is its colour for at least a little while, that's pretty cool, and I'll probably end up using that in some tablet weaving or something like that. But I didn't just add linen to that exhaust bath either. I also put in a hank of silk. And this one kind of surprised me. This one came out almost the same tone as the linen. And given that one is a cellulose and one is a protein fibre, I honestly expected the silk to be a little bit more like the wool, but it's taken on a slightly more grey tone, if that makes sense. So it's not quite the same as the wool, closer to the linen. Just a bit of an interesting observation. But all that said, I think this was a really successful experiment. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Let me know what you think of using Gorse Blossom as a dye staff. Let me know what you think about all these different beautiful colours we achieved in the yellow palette. And let me know what you think I should dye with next. That's all I've got for today though. Thank you for watching. Bye for now. I feel like this was pretty awesome. Just such good colours and such a good strong dye bath. Like, to be able to get that much colour in the exhaust, and I mean, I possibly even could have gotten another bath out of those blossoms, but that's pretty cool. Maybe I should work these into something together. They're very complementary. There's not much tonal difference. It's a good amount of yarn here. It's probably about 150 grams of yarn. Thanks for hanging around to the end of the video. You can give yourself 20 points.